The silence inside the Memphis Grizzlies organization wasn't just shocking, it felt unreal. One moment, fans were debating off-season moves, trade rumors, and the future of a franchise trying desperately to rebuild its identity after another injury-riddled season. And the next, one of the team's most beloved players was suddenly gone. At just 29 years old, Brandon Clarke was dead. No warning. No emotional farewell tour. No final games celebrated by fans inside a roaring arena. Just a devastating headline that spread across social media faster than anyone could process it. And within minutes, disbelief turned into confusion. Confusion turned into grief. And grief turned into a flood of questions nobody seemed prepared to answer. Because for many NBA fans, Brandon Clarke was never supposed to become this kind of story. He wasn't the loud superstar constantly dominating headlines. He wasn't the controversial personality feeding sports debate shows every week. He wasn't chasing celebrity culture or forcing himself into viral moments. Brandon Clarke built his reputation the old-fashioned way, through effort, humility, resilience, and an almost universally respected presence inside the locker room. That's what makes this tragedy feel so deeply unsettling. The public image surrounding Clarke never matched the darkness now surrounding the investigation into his death. According to early reports, authorities responded to a call at a home in California's San Fernando Valley, where Clarke was later pronounced dead. Officials initially released very few details, creating an information vacuum that immediately fueled speculation online. And then another detail emerged. Reports began circulating that investigators were examining the possibility of an overdose after alleged drug paraphernalia was reportedly found at the scene. While no official cause of death has been confirmed publicly, the revelation intensified public attention almost instantly. Suddenly, what began as a heartbreaking sports story transformed into something much larger and much more disturbing. Because only weeks earlier, Clarke had reportedly been arrested in Arkansas on charges related to speeding and possession of a controlled substance identified in reports as kratom, a legal but controversial herbal substance often debated for its stimulant and opioid-like effects. For many fans, the timeline became impossible to ignore. An arrest, injury struggles, years of physical pain, career uncertainty, and now a shocking death at 29. The internet immediately began trying to connect the dots. But behind every headline, every theory, every trending post, there was still a very real human being at the center of this tragedy. A player teammates described as gentle, loyal, quietly uplifting. Someone many inside the Grizzlies organization believed represented the emotional glue of the franchise during both its rise and its collapse. And that's where this story becomes far more painful than a simple sports headline. Because Brandon Clarke's journey to the NBA was never easy. Born in Vancouver, Canada, before moving to Arizona as a child, Clarke wasn't viewed as a guaranteed basketball prodigy. He wasn't one of those teenage phenoms dominating national television coverage before college. In fact, many scouts initially overlooked him completely. He began his college career at San Jose State, far away from the glamour of powerhouse basketball programs. But even there, coaches noticed something unusual about him. His athleticism didn't make sense. At 6'8", Clarke moved with explosive speed, relentless energy, and defensive instincts that made him look almost impossible to keep up with in transition. Eventually, his talent forced the basketball world to pay attention. After transferring to Gonzaga Bulldogs, Clarke exploded into national recognition. Analysts praised his efficiency, defensive timing, and ability to impact games without demanding constant attention. While other future NBA stars chased highlights and social media fame, Clarke became known as the player who simply did everything right. And in 2019, that work paid off. Selected 21st overall in the NBA draft before his rights were traded to the Memphis Grizzlies, Clarke arrived in Memphis during one of the most important transitional eras in franchise history. The Grizzlies were desperate for hope. The famed grit and grind era was over. The franchise needed a new identity. And alongside rising stars like Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clarke quickly became part of a young core that fans believed could eventually restore Memphis basketball to national relevance. What separated Clarke from many young NBA players was how quickly he earned respect, not just from fans, but from veterans. He played with intensity that felt genuine. Coaches trusted him. Teammates relied on him defensively. And perhaps most importantly, he seemed untouched by the ego that often swallows young professional athletes after sudden success. During his rookie season, Clarke averaged over 12 points and nearly 6 rebounds per game while earning NBA All-Rookie First-Team honors. It felt like only the beginning. But then came the injuries. And according to many longtime NBA observers, that's where the emotional trajectory of Brandon Clarke's career quietly began changing. In professional sports, fans often see injuries as statistics: torn ACL, Achilles rupture, knee inflammation, recovery timetable, return date. But athletes experience them very differently. Injuries isolate players emotionally. They disconnect them from teammates. They create fear about contracts, careers, financial security, identity, and self-worth. And Clarke endured almost all of it. A torn Achilles in 2023 dramatically altered the momentum of his career. Multiple lower body injuries followed. Knee issues, calf complications, endless rehabilitation. At one point, the explosive athlete who once looked capable of becoming a cornerstone piece for Memphis was fighting simply to stay healthy enough to remain on the court. Fans noticed the physical decline. But what many didn't notice was how psychologically brutal that cycle can become for professional athletes. Every missed game becomes criticism. Every rehab setback becomes speculation. Every decline becomes public conversation. For someone like Brandon Clarke, a player whose entire identity seemed tied to effort and physical energy, the emotional weight may have been enormous. That's part of why this tragedy has hit the basketball world so hard. Because people saw Clarke as resilient. Not invincible, but resilient. And now fans are looking back at every recent headline trying to figure out whether warning signs were missed. The arrest in Arkansas only intensified those questions. According to reports, Clarke was taken into custody after allegedly being found with kratom, a substance legal in some states but controversial due to ongoing debates about its effects and risks. Online reaction exploded immediately. Some fans argued the incident was being overblown. Others feared it suggested deeper personal struggles behind the scenes. On Reddit, users debated whether chronic injuries and pain management may have contributed to emotional or physical dependency issues, though none of those theories have been officially confirmed, and that uncertainty is exactly what has made this story spiral so aggressively online. Because in the absence of official answers, the internet creates its own narrative. One side of social media focused on grief. Emotional tribute videos flooded TikTok and Instagram. Fans reposted Clarke's biggest playoff moments. Memphis supporters recalled how beloved he was inside the city. Former teammates described him as one of the kindest personalities in the locker room. Another side of the internet focused on speculation. Overdose rumors. Mental health theories. Questions about the pressures athletes face behind closed doors. Discussions about pain management in professional sports. Debates over addiction, celebrity privacy, and whether modern sports culture does enough to emotionally protect injured players. And somewhere inside all of that noise, the human reality became almost impossible to process. Because Brandon Clarke wasn't just another athlete on a roster spreadsheet. He was engaged. He had future plans. And perhaps the most heartbreaking development after his death came from the woman who expected to spend her life with him. Days after Clarke's passing, his fiancée, Amber Lorraine, shared an emotional public tribute that devastated fans across social media. In the message, she described Clarke not only as a basketball player, but as a deeply loving partner whose life extended far beyond the court. She spoke about wedding plans, about building a family, about ordinary dreams that suddenly disappeared overnight. And suddenly, this story stopped feeling like celebrity news entirely. It became something painfully familiar to millions of people watching from home. The terrifying realization that success, fame, contracts, and public admiration do not necessarily protect someone from personal collapse. That realization is why this story exploded far beyond basketball media. Because Brandon Clarke's death touched multiple cultural nerves at once. The hidden emotional cost of professional sports. The mental strain of injury recovery. The pressure of maintaining public image. The loneliness athletes sometimes describe behind fame. And the terrifying speed at which life can completely unravel without public warning. Even NBA Commissioner Adam Silver released a statement mourning Clarke's death, describing him as a beloved teammate who played with passion and grit. But for Memphis fans, the grief felt even more personal. Because Clarke represented a very specific era in Grizzlies history, an era built around hope. The 2019 draft class symbolized rebirth for the franchise. Ja Morant brought electricity. Jaren Jackson Jr. brought star potential. Brandon Clarke brought emotional balance, energy, sacrifice, stability. Many fans online described him as the glue guy whose absence was quietly felt long before his death because injuries had already separated him from the team's rhythm. And now, suddenly, he's gone forever. That finality has created a haunting atmosphere around the story. Because unlike retirement, unlike trades, unlike even career-ending injuries, death removes the possibility of redemption arcs. There's no comeback season, no emotional return game, no chance to rewrite public perception. Whatever pain Clarke may have been carrying, fans are now left trying to reconstruct it through fragments. Old interviews, body language, recent legal troubles, injury history, social media posts. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of all. How often audiences only begin looking closely at someone's suffering after they're already gone. In the days following the news, sports commentators began discussing the broader culture surrounding professional athletes and pain management. While no confirmed connection has been established between Clarke's injuries and the investigation into his death, many analysts noted how physically punishing professional basketball can become over time. Athletes are expected to recover quickly, perform publicly, stay marketable, remain emotionally composed, ignore criticism, and constantly prove their value. For injured players, that pressure compounds every single day, especially when careers begin slipping away. At only 29 years old, Clarke should theoretically have been entering the later prime years of his career. Instead, injuries had reduced his playing time dramatically. Reports indicate he appeared in only 2 games during the 2025 to 2026 season. 2 games. For someone who once looked like one of the NBA's rising stars, that kind of decline can become emotionally devastating. And yet publicly, Clarke rarely complained. That's another reason this tragedy feels emotionally complicated. Fans often assume quiet people are okay simply because they aren't visibly falling apart. Sometimes the people struggling most become experts at hiding it. As investigators continue examining the circumstances surrounding Clarke's death, public fascination with the case has only intensified. Some media outlets have cautiously referenced overdose possibilities while emphasizing that no official ruling has yet been publicly released. That distinction matters. Because in today's internet culture, rumors often spread faster than confirmed facts. A single speculative post can shape public perception permanently before investigators ever finish their work. And that creates another uncomfortable dimension to this tragedy, the collision between grief and online entertainment. Within hours of the news breaking, YouTube channels, TikTok creators, sports influencers, and reaction streamers flooded platforms with emotional thumbnails, theories, and speculation. Some focused respectfully on Clarke's career and legacy. Others immediately leaned into mystery narratives and overdose rumors. That divide reflects something larger happening in modern media culture. Audiences don't just consume tragedy anymore. They participate in it. They investigate it collectively, debate it publicly, turn it into content ecosystems fueled by algorithms that reward emotional intensity over nuance. And Brandon Clarke's death became exactly that kind of story. A young athlete, A sudden death. An unresolved investigation. Legal trouble weeks earlier. A grieving fiancé. And a fan base desperately searching for answers. It's the kind of narrative modern internet culture almost cannot stop amplifying. But underneath all the headlines, the sports debates, the speculation, and the social media chaos remains one deeply uncomfortable truth. A 29-year-old man lost his life. A family lost a son. A woman lost the person she planned to marry. And an entire NBA franchise lost someone many internally considered part of its emotional foundation. Long after the trending hashtags disappear, that reality will remain. Years from now, Memphis fans will still remember the energy Brandon Clarke brought to the court. The blocked shots. The hustle plays. The playoff intensity. The chemistry he shared with teammates during the franchise's most hopeful years. But they'll also remember the sadness surrounding how abruptly everything ended. Because there's something uniquely haunting about unrealized futures. Especially in sports. Fans become emotionally attached not only to what athletes accomplish, but to what they believe those athletes still might become. And Brandon Clarke still felt unfinished. That's why this story hurts. Not just because of death itself, but because of everything that now will never happen. The comeback season. The healthy return. The redemption narrative. The wedding. The family. The second chapter. Gone. And maybe the most chilling part of this entire story is how ordinary the beginning of that final chapter probably looked. No dramatic final public appearance. No obvious goodbye. No cinematic ending. Just another day that suddenly became irreversible. As the investigation continues and more details eventually emerge, public conversation around Brandon Clarke's death will likely evolve again. There may be medical conclusions, legal clarifications, additional reports, more statements from those closest to him. But even if every unanswered question eventually receives an answer, one question may continue haunting fans long after the headlines fade. How many people around us are carrying invisible pain we never truly notice until it's too late? And in a sports culture built around toughness, performance, and public image, how many athletes are silently struggling behind the scenes while millions assume they're living perfect lives? That may ultimately become the most important conversation Brandon Clarke leaves behind. Not just about basketball, not just about celebrity, but about the hidden emotional cost of survival in a world where vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness. If you followed Brandon Clarke's career, if you watched him grow with Memphis, or if this story affected you in any way, share your thoughts below. Because for many fans, this doesn't feel like losing just another NBA player. It feels like losing someone who still had an entire life left to live. In the hours after the first wave of shock began to settle, something unusual happened in the sports world. The noise didn't quiet down. It intensified. Normally, tragedies follow a predictable rhythm in the digital age. Breaking news. Emotional tributes. Confusion. Then gradual silence as official details emerge and public attention moves on. But this time, the silence never arrived. Instead, the story of Brandon Clarke seemed to split into multiple parallel realities online. In one version, he was remembered as a beloved teammate whose career was cut short just as he was entering a new phase of life. In another, he had become the center of a sprawling, unresolved investigation that people were dissecting frame by frame like a crime documentary unfolding in real time. And somewhere between those two extremes, the truth, still incomplete, still fragile, was struggling to be heard. Inside the Memphis Grizzlies organization, the emotional impact reportedly hit immediately. Players were told privately before any official statement reached the public, and according to early accounts from team insiders, the locker room reaction was described as stunned silence. Not anger, not chaos, just disbelief that lingered too long for anyone to speak comfortably. One assistant coach reportedly told local reporters that the hardest part wasn't the news itself, it was the absence of preparation for it. Clarke had not been someone associated with ongoing controversy inside the team environment. He was, by most internal accounts, consistent, respectful, and focused, the kind of player organizations often assume will always be there tomorrow. That illusion was now gone. And in its place was a question no franchise is ever emotionally equipped to answer. How do you move forward when someone so recently part of your daily rhythm is suddenly absent forever?